I have set more bones than I can count, and I want to tell you at the start that I never once, in 60 years of mending soldiers, thought I would spend the most important day of my life with my hands clean. My name is Emerick Van. I was the senior surgeon of the Saltmark Infirmary, which is a low-gray building of poured stone and living coral grown into the inner face of the northern seawall, and for the better part of 4 decades my whole world was the smell of antiseptic and the sound of the tide working at the outer stones. We were a defense infirmary. That is a particular kind of place. It exists to receive the broken when the wall is tested, and so it is built strong, and stocked deep, and staffed by people who have made a quiet peace with waiting for a bad day that they hope never comes. The wall we served ran for 300 miles along that coast, and it was old the way a grandmother is old. Everyone alive had grown up in its shadow. No one alive had raised it. It had been raised across a span of 11,000 years, course by course, generation by generation, the way other peoples build cathedrals, except that no god was ever named in its stones. What was named, if you knew where to look, was arithmetic. There were figures cut into the base courses of every gate, worn nearly smooth by weather and hands, and the figures were not measurements or dates. They were tallies. They were the counting marks the old masters had once used to number us. I should tell you about the masters, because everything I am about to say only means anything if you understand what we remembered. 11,000 years before the day I am going to describe, this world belonged to a people we knew only from the record as the Kessen, and the record was very old and very careful, because we had made certain of that. The Kessen were not conquerors in the way children imagine conquerors, all fire and banners. They were husbandmen. They were the finest herdsmen in their reach of the galaxy, and they had built their long wealth on the patient management of living stock across 100 worlds, and to them Earth had been a stock world, a good one, a rich green pasture of a planet, and we had been the stock. They did not hate us. That was the thing the old teachers always drove hardest into the young, because it was the thing hardest to hold in the mind. The Kessen had never hated us any more than a farmer hates his herd. They had counted us, and bred us to their liking, and harvested from us what they wished, and moved us between pens across the whole face of the earth, and thinned us when our numbers displeased them, and they had done all of it with the calm, unbothered competence of people who were simply very good at their trade, and had never once been made to wonder whether their trade was a crime. And then, 11,000 years ago, they had gone. The record is honest that we do not fully know why. Something moved in their reach of the stars, a contraction, a war among the warder clans, a market for stock worlds that fell out from under them. The record allows several readings and insists on none. What we know is that one season the husbandry fleets that tended Earth withdrew and were not replaced, and the pen stood open, and the herd was left to itself on a green world at the edge of a fallow rotation. In their ledgers we became a line marked for later, a pasture rested, a field left to lie until the soil recovered, and it was worth the crossing to come and work it again. They called it a fallow. We called it the long fallow, and we built a civilization inside it, and we spent every year of it getting ready. That is the part that matters. That is the whole of it, really, and if you take nothing else from an old man's account, take this. We did not spend 11,000 years forgetting. Any other people might have. The masters certainly expected us to. A herd left to run wild goes feral in a handful of generations. It scatters, it thins. It forgets the shape of the pen and the sound of the drovers. It becomes stupid and frightened and easy. And when you come back to gather it, you gather it like an animal because that is what it has become. The Kessen knew this. They had done it 100 times on 100 worlds. Leaving a pasture fallow and returning to a docile, degraded, gatherable herd was not a hope of theirs. It was arithmetic. It was a thing that had always worked. They did not understand what we had done with the years. The very first thing the earliest free generations did before the wall, before the fleets, before any of it, was refuse to forget. They took the master's own tools and turned them. The Kessin had counted us. We kept the counting, but now we counted ourselves, and we wrote at the head of every roll that these were free names, and we cut the old tally marks into the foundations of everything we built, so that no child would ever grow up not knowing that the numbers had once meant something monstrous. The Kessin had bred us. We studied the breeding, unwound it, understood our own bodies and minds better than the masters ever had, and made ourselves stronger and clearer and longer-lived than any herd they had ever managed. The Kessin had penned us. We studied the pens and the husbandry logic behind them, and the fleets that had enforced them, and across 11,000 patient years, we built the thing that a herd builds when it has decided, with its whole collective soul, that it will never be gathered again. We built a world that was ready. Not angry. That is the thing the old teachers were most careful about, and the thing I understood best of all because I was a surgeon and I have held too many dying men to have much taste for rage. Anger burns out. Anger forgets. Anger is a feeling, and feelings do not last 11,000 years. What lasts is discipline, the daily, unglamorous, generation-over-generation act of maintaining a readiness for an enemy that has not come and may never come, of drilling children in the old count, of keeping the walls stone sound and the fleets in the sky and the infirmaries stocked, century after century, when nothing at all is happening and the sea is calm, and it would be so very easy to let it all go slack. We did not let it go slack. That was our whole genius if we had won. We were patient the way the masters had been patient, and we were better at it than they were, because they were patient about profit and we were patient about never again. So the wall, the infirmary. Me, an old man with clean hands, on the morning the masters came back. I remember it was a gray dawn with a hard, flat sea, the kind of light that makes everything look like it is carved out of pewter. I had come up from the wards early because I could not sleep, which at my age is less a complaint than a schedule, and I was standing on the surgeon's walk at the top of the seawall with a cup of something hot going cold in my hands. And the horn started. You have to understand that I had heard that horn all my life, and it had never once meant anything. Every wall on that coast carried the deep note horns, and they were sounded at every solstice and every anniversary of the fallow's beginning, and they were tested on the first morning of every month, and in all my years the horn had never meant a real thing. It was a ritual. It was a grandfather's ritual, a keeping faith with the dead, a promise sounded into an empty sky. That morning it did not sound like a ritual. I cannot tell you exactly how a horn sounds different when it means it, but I have thought about it a great deal since, and I believe it was the length of it. The ceremonial soundings are measured, 3 long notes and a rest, dignified, unhurried. This was not measured. This went on, note over note the whole length of the coast, tower answering tower northward and southward, until the sound of it filled the whole gray bowl of the morning. And I set my cup down on the parapet very carefully, because my hands had begun to shake, and I looked up. They came in over the sea. I had studied the old images all my life, as every child did the husbandry fleets, the great slow shapes of them, and I want to be precise about what came down through that gray sky because precision is the only honesty an old man has left. They were not warships. That was the first wrong note, and I felt it in my chest before my mind could name it. A warship has a shape that says one thing. These did not say that. These were vast, blunt, patient shapes, dun-colored, built around enormous open holds, droving craft, gathering craft, the great slow barges of a people who had come to collect livestock and carry it away. I had seen their like in the record 1,000 times and never in the sky, and to see them low over that pewter sea, 3 of them, then 5, then more than I could easily count, sliding in with the unhurried confidence of men arriving at a field they have owned for generations. I will tell you honestly that my first feeling was not fear. It was a terrible, vertiginous recognition. They had come. After 11,000 years, on an ordinary gray morning, while my tea went cold, they had actually come. And they had come to gather a herd. You could read it in the very shape of the fleet. There were no massed guns run out. There were no shield lines up. They had not come expecting a fight, because in their arithmetic there was no one here to fight. There was a feral, scattered, degraded stock, thinned by 11,000 years of running wild, to be found in its broken bands and driven and loaded and carried off to be sorted and bred and put back to use. They had come the way you come to a pasture, not the way you come to a war. Their holds were open. They had brought pens. I have thought many times since about the exact moment their arithmetic broke, and I believe I watched it happen, though of course I could not see their faces then. I could only see the fleet, but I could see what the fleet saw. They came in low over the sea toward a coast that they remembered from their old surveys as green and open and unmarked, a good pasture, edge of a continent, easy landfall. What they found instead was the wall. 300 miles of it, gray and vast and sea-stained. Its base courses cut with 11,000 years of tally marks. Its heights bristling with the disciplined geometry of a civilization that had spent every one of those years deciding this exact morning would go a particular way. And above the wall, rising off their cradles along the whole length of the coast with a slowness that was itself a kind of message, the sky fleets of Earth. I need to tell you about our fleets, because the contrast is the whole of the story, and because I am proud of it in a way that has nothing to do with me. The Kessen had come in droving barges. Our ships came up to meet them, and they were not barges. They were the accumulated work of 11,000 years of a people who had studied their masters' machines and then spent 100 centuries surpassing them, and they rose off that coast in their hundreds, kilometers long, clean and terrible and utterly silent, and they did not rush. That was the thing. They did not scramble up like a startled flock. They rose the way the wall was built, course by course, unhurried, each one taking its assigned station in a lattice across the whole sky, and the light of that pewter dawn ran along their hulls, and there were so many of them that the gray morning dimmed under their shadow as if a second overcast had rolled in from the land. And then they simply held. That was the discipline of it. That was the thing 11,000 years had built, and I understood it then, standing on the wall with my cold tea and my shaking hands, in a way I had never understood it in all the solstice ceremonies of my life. We did not fire. There was not, in that entire first hour, a single shot fired from the wall or the sky or the sea. The whole overwhelming might of a world that had prepared for this exact morning across 100 centuries rose up into the sky and then stopped, and held and waited, and let the masters look. Because we wanted them to see. You do not spend 11,000 years preparing simply in order to destroy. Any people can destroy. Destruction is quick and it is cheap and it forgets. We had not built the wall to kill the Kessen. We had built it so that when they came on whatever gray morning they chose, the very first thing they would do, before a single word was exchanged, was understand. We wanted the arithmetic to break in their own minds without our help, so that they would carry the breaking home with them and it would be true. The horns had stopped. The whole coast had gone silent, land and sea and sky, and into that silence the fleets of two peoples faced each other across a strip of gray water, and nothing moved, and I stood on the wall and watched the masters of my ancestors realize where they were. They hailed us first. Of course they did. In their arithmetic we could not hail them. A herd does not speak. The hail came across every old band at once, and it was broadcast down to the wall and out across the coast so that all of us heard it, because our commanders wanted us to hear it, wanted every soul on that shore to hear the masters speak and to hear how we answered. I have heard the recording many times since. I heard it live, standing on the wall, and I will carry the sound of it to my grave. The voice was calm. That was the worst of it and the most important. It was not a war voice. It was patient and dry and faintly, unbearably kind, the voice of a herdsman speaking to stock that has grown skittish, and it spoke to us in the old tongue of the pens. A trade cant the masters had used to give commands to their herds, simple, clear, built for creatures they did not credit with real minds. It told us to be calm. It told us that the warders had returned to their pasture, that the long rest was ended, that we would be gathered gently if we did not resist and less gently if we did, and that there was no cause for fear, because we were valued, because we were good stock, because we belonged to them and always had. And it called us by the old count. It gave the number the Kessin had marked us as, 11,000 years before the herd designation, the pasture tally, and it used that number the way you would use the name of a favored animal, and it asked, in the flat kind husbandry cant, whether the herd understood. I remember the silence after. It was very long. The whole coast held its breath, and I held mine, and I think even the sea went quiet, and I understood that our commanders were letting the silence run on purpose, letting the masters sit in it, letting the arithmetic strain. And then Earth answered, and I want to be careful here, because the answer is the thing I am proudest of, and pride makes an old man clumsy. We did not answer in the husbandry cant. That was the first thing, and it was a decision, and I understood it the moment it happened. To answer in their pen tongue would have been to accept the terms, to be a herd that had learned to speak. Instead, the answer came in our own tongue, the oldest of our free tongues, the one the first liberated generations had made. And it came not from a single ship, but from the whole fleet at once, and from the wall, and from the deep horns, and from 100 million throats along 300 miles of coast, because our commanders had opened every channel and every horn and every voice, so that what the masters heard was not a negotiator. What they heard was a world. And the answer was not a threat. I want you to understand that, because you will expect a threat, and there was none. The answer was the count. We read them the roll. Not the old herd tally. Our roll. The free roll, the one the first generations had begun, and that 11,000 years of keepers had carried forward, name by name, the names of the free dead going back to the very first who had refused to forget. The roll that we cut, in tally mark, into the foundations of every gate on the wall. We read it to them. It came across every band and every horn in the plain measured cadence of a thing that has been read aloud once a year for 11,000 years, and it did not stop, and it did not hurry, and there was in it no anger at all, only the vast unbearable weight of a people telling their former owners in the calmest voices in the world, we counted ourselves. We have been counting ourselves for 11,000 years. Here are the numbers. Not one of them is yours. That was our answer to the masters, not a shot, a count. I was a surgeon. I understood answers like that in my bones. There is a thing that happens in a ward when a man who has been screaming goes quiet, not the quiet of dying, but the quiet of a man who has understood his own condition and has stopped fighting the truth of it. That is what happened in the sky over the salt mark. I could not see the Kessin, but I could see their fleet, and their fleet went quiet in exactly that way. The great droving barges, which had come in with the unhurried confidence of owners, drifted to a stop over the gray water and simply sat there, holds open to a sky full of ships they could not have built, over a coast walled to the horizon with the marks of account they had thought forgotten, while a world they had written down as a resting pasture read them its dead. Their arithmetic had broken. I watched it break. And here is the thing I have never been able to make the young ones fully understand, though I have tried. In that moment, we had already won. Everything after was only the shape of the winning. Because we could have destroyed them. I need you to hold that, because it is the axis the whole day turned on. There were more than 80 droving barges over that sea, and not one of them could have survived the first minute of a fight, and every soul aboard the fleet in the sky and on the wall and along the coast knew it with the flat certainty of 11,000 years of preparation. The power was total. It was not a near thing. It was not a brave last stand. We were not the scrappy herd making its desperate break for freedom. That story is a beautiful story, and it was not our story. Our story was worse for them and better for us. We were the pasture that had spent the whole fallow becoming the strongest thing in that reach of the sky, and the masters had sailed their open-holded gathering barges into the middle of it with pens ready, and we held them in the palm of one closed hand and let them feel the hand close. And then we did not close it. That was the discipline. That was the thing the wall was for. any people can destroy. We had built 11,000 years of readiness for a harder thing than destruction, and the hardest thing, the thing that takes real strength, is to have the power to end them and choose instead to let them understand. The order came down the wall to the infirmary the same as everywhere, and I remember the exact words because they were so unlike anything I had braced for. We had drilled for casualties my whole career. The salt mark was stocked for a bad day, for burned crews and crushed wounds, and the particular horrors of a wall under real assault, and I had spent 40 years quietly certain that if the masters ever came, I would spend that day to my elbows in the dying. The order that came down was this: stand ready to receive their wounded. Theirs, not ours. I have set more bones than I can count, and I told you at the start that the strangest thing about the most important day of my life was that my hands stayed clean, and here is why. We did not fire. Across 300 miles of coast, across 80-some droving barges and a sky full of ships that could have unmade them in a breath, we did not fire a single shot. There was nothing to receive at the salt mark because we made certain there was nothing to receive. The order to stand ready for their wounded was not a real expectation. It was a message, sent down the wall so that every soul would hear it, and the message was this: we are so far past you that our surgeons are being told to be gentle with you. There is no colder thing you can say to a people who came to gather you than to have your field hospital placed on standby for their sake. It said everything the Count had said, and worse. What we did instead of firing was open the road home. This is the part the young ones always find hardest to accept, and I understand why, because I am an old man and there is a young man still somewhere inside me who wanted, on that gray morning, to watch the barges burn. I will not pretend otherwise. When the kind, dry husbandry voice called us by our old herd number, something in me that was 11,000 years old wanted the sky to open on them. But I was a surgeon, and I had held too many dying men of my own to have any real appetite for it, and I think the whole world felt the same way at once, because when the order came to open the road, no one along that coast argued. We powered down the guns, in full view. That was the whole art of it, and it had been thought about, I am certain, for centuries, how exactly you show mercy to your former masters in a way that is not weakness. You do it visibly. You do it slowly. The wall's batteries, which the masters could now read as easily as they read the Count, ran down their charge in plain sight, one after another down 300 miles of coast, the deep hum of them falling away into silence, and the fleet in the sky rolled its weapons in and stood down where the whole Kessin fleet could see it. And we lowered the closed hand and opened it flat, and we did it where they could watch, so that they would understand that it was a choice and not an incapacity. That a world which could have ended them had looked at them and decided instead to let them go. And then our commanders spoke to them one last time, and this time it was one voice, level and unhurried, in our own tongue with the old trade cant beneath it, so they could not fail to understand, and I heard it on the wall the same as everyone, and I have it by heart. It did not gloat. There was no welcome back, no cold little joke, none of the things a smaller people would have reached for. It told them simply that the pasture they remembered was gone, and that the herd they had come to gather had spent the fallow becoming something they had no word for, and that they were free to see it with their own eyes for as long as they needed, and then they were to go home. It told them we bore them no hatred, and this was true. It was the truest thing we said all day, because you cannot sustain hatred for 11,000 years, only readiness. It told them that the count they had heard was the whole of our answer, and that we would keep counting ourselves for as long as our line lasted, and that they were welcome to carry that number home and set it in their ledgers beside the old one so that their descendants would know what a fallow could grow. And then it told them the last thing, and this is the part I want to end on, because it is the part that has stayed with me longest, and it is why an old surgeon with clean hands considers that day the truest day of his craft. It offered them aid. The voice told the Kessin that if ever in their long husbandry across the stars they should find themselves in real need, broken, hunted, contracting, the way the record whispers they may already have been, to have come all this way to work an old field. Then they had only to come to us honestly, as people and not as masters, and we would help them. That the strength they had just watched us hold back was not only a wall. That a people who could remember an injury for 11,000 years and choose, at the height of their power, not to repay it, could also remember a kindness, if ever they were given the chance to be shown one. I have thought about why we said that, and I believe I understand it now at the end of my life better than I did on the wall. We did not say it to be gentle. We said it because it was the last, heaviest thing we could set on them. To be spared by the herd you came to gather is a hard thing to carry home. To be pitied by it, to be offered, by the pasture you meant to harvest, a hand up should you ever fall, that is a weight a proud people carries all the way back across the dark and cannot ever set down. The mercy was the blow. The offer of aid was the point of the blade, and it was aimed with 11,000 years of care, and it went home. The barges left before the tide turned. They closed their empty holds and drew up off the gray sea, and their vast dun shapes lifted back into the overcast the way they had come, unhurried now for a different reason. And our fleets held their lattice across the whole sky and let them go, ship by ship, without a shot, until the last of them had climbed out through the cloud and the gray morning was only gray again, and the sea was only the sea, and the horns, far down the coast, sounded the 3 long measured notes and the rest. The old ceremonial call, the keeping faith, and this time it did not sound like a ritual at all. This time it sounded like a thing that had been kept. I picked up my cold tea from the parapet. My hands had stopped shaking. Below me, the infirmary stood ready and empty, stocked deep for a bad day that had come and gone without spending a single bandage. And I stood there a long while in the returning light, and let myself feel the whole 11,000 years of it settle onto the wall and into the stones and into me. We are asked sometimes by the very young why we still keep the count, why we still cut the tally marks into every gate, why the horns still sound at the solstice, why the fleets still drill and the walls still stand, and the infirmaries still lie stocked and ready along a coast that has not seen a Kessin barge in the lifetime since. The masters are gone. They will not come again, not those ones. The voice that spoke to us was, I am sure of it, a voice that understood it had reached the end of something. So why keep faith with a fallow that is over? I have my surgeon's answer, and it is the only one I trust. You keep the count because the keeping is the thing itself. It was never the wall that saved us, and it was never the fleets. It was 11,000 years of ordinary people, on ordinary gray mornings, choosing not to let it go slack, reading the roll aloud one more year, cutting the marks one more course, standing one more watch on a sea that was almost certainly empty. The strength that held 80 barges in a closed hand and chose to open it was not built on the day it was needed. It was built on all the days it was not. That is the whole of what we are. We are a people who remembered without hatting, for longer than the memory had any right to last, and were ready when it mattered, and were strong enough at the height of it to be gentle. The tea was cold and I drank it anyway. The horns finished their measured call and the coast went quiet, and I went back down into the infirmary to put away the instruments we had not needed, and I found, setting each clean blade back into its place, that I was not thinking of the masters at all. I was thinking of the first of us, the ones with no wall and no fleets and nothing at all but the decision to keep count, and I understood, at last, whose day it had really been. It had never been the master's pasture. It had only taken us 11,000 years to make certain they knew it.